We act like change starts with a blank slate, but the page is already covered in a script. So we have to stop enacting that one. It's great. Yes, we do need a new script. We do need a new narrative. New year, new me is fine, but someone's got to kill the old you.
Hey, Creating Maven. I'm Joy Spencer, your reframe specialist, with one important message. Your real work, it's not your job or your career. Your real work is what you create. And what you create is what sets you apart and makes you incomparable. It's your legacy. I'm here to show you a whole new way of working so you can create with your gifts, make a unique contribution, and finally get paid to be yourself. This is Reframe to Create. Have you ever tried so hard to make a change and maybe succeeded for a little while, but felt that things just eventually went back to factory settings? Or maybe you didn't even get that far and were stuck, never leaving home base in the first place. The New Year's resolution that never makes it out to February, the diet that flops at the first sight or the next sighting of a cookie, the newly bought treadmill that's more a clothing rack than an exercise machine. I mean, what gives? Believe me, I'm just as stumped about this as you are, and I run into many brick walls when trying to support transformation in myself, with individual clients, or even in organizations. What are we doing wrong? I mean, what are we missing? That's what my guest today will help us identify and help us get our arms around, because everything about what we need to create comes out of who we are. And I say this to you all the time. We can only go as far as who we are. We can only create out of who we are. And if who we are right now needs a reframe, we've got to get that reframe right. And if we keep getting stuck in our reframes and keep struggling with our transformations, it's the root of why we're struggling to create, isn't it? Hansen is an associate professor of management at Texas Tech, and he's also the author of Narrative Change: How Changing the Story Can Transform Society, Business, and Ourselves. And in this book, he talks about how narratives were used to fight the death penalty in Texas. After reading Hans' book, I knew I had to get him here in front of you so that he could drop his nuggets of wisdom about why change is just so hard. I got right to asking him this. I was really curious and drawn to this work and to your book because I'm a coach and I do a lot of work with individuals, and even as an OD consultant organizations like that coaching OD world, it's about change, navigating change, and people want to change individually. People have like developmental growth and change that they want to make, and people and organizations want to change and grow and do different things, and just can never figure out why they can't do it well or keep getting stuck, or why it's so hard, or why it's just so difficult. We're told to envision what we want for the future, and off we go trotting off to try to attain it, but it's so difficult. Why is it so hard? Why is it just so intractable, and how can we get around it?
So there's one good test that you mentioned, that most of the times we create a vision, but not the path to get there. I think that happens in a narrative or a story. And if you cannot create the story of your success in a narrative, there's no way you can enact it because there's nothing to enact. So enacting a narrative brings it to fruition. But if you can't get it down in narrative form, there's no way to actually produce it or to make your vision come to fruition. So a vision is great, but you have to tell me in a plausible, incredible, detailed manner, how are you going to get there? Like, what is going to happen first? What's going to happen next for you to reach your goal, or for your vision to come true? And I think people just think that they can come up with the vision without coming up with the plan to get there. So a narrative is like a strategy, but it's a strategy with a plan for how it's going to be implemented. I think most of the times we have an end state in mind. That vision is too end state heavy. Like, we're going to be the top sales in our industry. But what does that mean to you? How are you going to do that? Does that mean you answer your phone on the first ring? Does that mean you guarantee returns 100% of the time? Does that mean you never lose a customer? So you have to build up all the things that are going to happen for your vision or your goal to come to fruition. And all of a sudden, we're talking about a plot when we're talking about how is it going to happen. And if you can't do it decisively and plausible on paper, you don't have a prayer of doing it in practice.
Well, this is interesting because
I know a lot of people like vision boards, and we do a lot of vision work in organizations and OKRs. And I don't know how you feel about OKRs as sort of like the next step for once you set a vision. But it sounds like what you're saying is, our tendency to be like, here's my vision, this is what I want, and then here are my goals to get there is not enough. It has to be, even that getting there part has to be in a story form. It has to be that narrative. It has to be more descriptive, more the this is the character, this is what they're going through, here are the obstacles, writing it down in that form, creating the picture, really picture form in our minds, as opposed to the shorter bullet points of achieve this, and achieve this next thing.
I mean, more valuable than a vision board is all the decisions that go into making it. And then once we have the vision board, we lose that decision making about why, because every image on a vision board has a story about why you picked that and how it's going to come to be. I mean, the why we picked it is good, but the picture alone can't tell me how it's going to come to be. So you can put a vision board of a car on your vision board, but by what means, by what income, what are you going to do to get that income to get to that, to make that vision come to fruition?
Then we have to create an entire story that leads up to that picture, not just achieve, achieve, achieve.
Yeah, the story kind of allows us to actually get to the end state, allows the vision board to become enacted. So that's something that has to be brought to being. So I think one thing that I have a pet peeve about is everyone manifesting success. Kind of wish the vision board upon you. I mean, we could step outside and go manifest Mercedes all day long, but someone needs a paycheck.
Yeah.
So I think it happens in action. But here's the thing: a narrative. This is a crux point. All that stuff has to be enacted. So there are actions that you have to do. Behind that is that a narrative always guides our actions. So you're creating the narrative, the story, the plot that is going to guide your actions, and then I mean, if you create the script that gets you from your present to your future, you still have to perform the script. Just having the script isn't enough, but you can't perform without a script. So this narrative work is creating the script that gets me from point A to point B, and then I can't get to point B without a performance, but I can't perform without the script or narrative either.
So it's like your life literally is a play. You talked about performance, you've talked about script. It is about writing the script that you're going to follow and enact and perform to get to where you're going.
And everyone is only thinking about the last scene,
Mm.
but not opening credits to closing credits. Or when we tell high school students to envision your funeral, what is going to be said about you as a way to kind of narrate your life. That's too end point. It does not tell them, even if people say, oh, she was a captain of industry or she was the designer that wowed the world. That doesn't tell me that she went to design school and then she got an internship here and then worked with the right people. So those things are how it happens. So I think we are heavy on the end game and not focused enough on the process.
So we have to tell the whole story.
And I think narrating gets us there. You cannot shortcut a narrative.
So how did you guys do this? Is this what you guys did when you were working in your work on the death penalty in Texas?
Yeah. So for the death penalty, we use narratives in a couple ways. One was to create and enact our own narrative about how we wanted death penalty defense to go. And that was the realization. We knew that there already was a way that the death penalty went. So resistance has to be an important part of change because you're resisting the current way. I mean, everything that you do in your life, you already have a current way you do something. So you can't just institute the new way without also resisting the current way. So we were really conscious of the narratives that were guiding the current way that we act or the current narratives that guide our action. When we created a new narrative, we had to think about those actions we had to resist in order to enact our new narrative. The other way we used it was to demystify what our adversaries were doing. Everyone, whenever someone says, oh, they're acting crazy or they're doing something that doesn't make sense, whatever they're doing makes sense to them because they are being guided by a narrative. The problem is that we are using our narratives to interpret the behavior of others, but their actions are being guided by their narrative. So if you just go into every interaction, I mean, this is how cross-cultural miscommunications happen. We are looking at their actions and deciphering them with our narrative. If you just have an awareness, a cultural awareness of their actions are being guided by their narrative, and their actions make sense to them, then you can start to infer what they must be going by or what narrative is guiding them. And if you know what narrative is guiding someone else, that's really, really insightful and reflexive. I mean, you can motivate others, you can figure out how to act in such a way that they will help you fulfill your narrative. So a narrative lens is really helpful in not only planning your own actions, but in deciphering the actions of others.
Yeah, it's like if you were on the stage with someone else who you thought you were both in the same play, but you have totally different scripts and everyone
They have
is
a different script.
right, they're
Yeah.
doing the performance and you're like, "What are you doing?" And they're like, "Well, what are you doing?" Then realizing and looking over and being like, "Oh, I'm doing Romeo and Juliet and you're doing Hamlet. No wonder we can't you know, make sense of what's happening here."
And I mean, you can improvise. You can decide to write something together, but knowing what they're going by, you can invite people into your process or find a way that you can. I mean, all organizations have to do this. They have to create a collective narrative where everybody gets to have their goals come true. In the death penalty, one goal the prosecutor has is to keep costs low. So if we start to act in such a way that they become conscious of that narrative, when they're trying to keep their costs low, they want a case to go away. We want our case to go away also. So all of a sudden, we're going by similar narratives that they want the case to go away and we want the case to go away. But we had to become conscious that it was through our actions. We didn't just hope that they would switch narratives. We acted in such a way that their narrative, reduced costs, became salient. And this is common in legal. It's a common legal maneuver to increase the case of a cost so that the other side will settle. So you can do something to help others enact a narrative that is aligned with your narrative. And so to flip the switch in an organizational setting, the organization can't have one narrative and people have a different narrative. They have to at least be aligned. So I want to become the number one company in my industry, but my people want challenge and involvement and they want to have some kind of accomplishment. If theirs doesn't align with the organization's, we cannot enact the same narrative.
So I want to go back to resistance, and we talked about resistance, about how I think there's always resistance, or you always have to resist the current narrative and your status quo. And I think we talked about that. We touched on that before this episode, and that's something that was very fascinating to me that you shared, and that was also in your book. This idea that we often skip over what is current, and we're not intentional about shifting and resisting the current script that we're reading from when we say we want change and when we say we want to transform and when we want to do something else. And talk to us a little bit more about why that's such a problem for individuals, organizations, and society, and how we can do it. Right? I think intellectually we can receive that information of like, okay, this is the problem, but how do we do that? Because that seems pretty difficult.
It is difficult. So here's the assumption. We are always being guided by a narrative. We never act without a narrative. Even when you return an item to a store, you kick off your I'm going to return an item script. And you know how it goes. You bring your item up to the counter. They say, do you have your receipt? You say no. They say, do you have your card? So if everybody has the same script, the interaction goes smoothly. So whenever you act, whenever you make a decision, whenever you make an interpretation, you're always using a narrative that's in your cognitive framework. So you can't act without a narrative. Here's the bugger, though. We are so often unconscious that we're going by a narrative. So that's why we skip this confrontation with the existing way we do things when we want to change an organization or change ourselves. We think, I'm just going to institute a new narrative. New year, new me. Well, hang on. The old year and old you is on your back. You know? So we act like change starts with a blank slate, but the page is already covered in a script. So we have to stop enacting that one. It's great. Yes, we do need a new script. We do need a new narrative. New year, new me is fine, but someone's got to kill the old you.
Mm.
That old you is still trying to do the things it has always done. So we cannot have this punctuated fantasy that I'm just going to start a new narrative. because our actions are already being guided by a narrative, and we have to resist that one. That happens through one, bringing it to awareness. This is the hard part, because these things become, we do the same thing the same way for so long, we enact the same narrative for so long, it becomes autopilot. And then we lose an awareness, and we think we're just going about our day, and that it feels as if it is unguided, but it is being guided so subtly and stealthily and eloquently that we forget the narrative is there. So first we have to become conscious of it, and then we have to deconstruct it.
Okay, y'all, I have to interrupt because Hans was hitting me right between the eyes, and I have to raise my hand and confess I do this. This is totally me. Maybe it comes from my days as a social justice activist and policy advocate, but I am notorious for just thinking I can envision a grand new future and then poof, let's just work towards it and make it happen. And if I think about it, there are probably ways in which I've been asking this same thing with this entire podcast. I've been asking you and challenging you to become a creating maven, painting this glorious vision of being paid to be you, barreling forward into this grand vision of the future, and maybe dragging you along willingly, mostly since you're listening to the podcast. But what about the old you? What about the old me? What about the existing narratives that we're not aware of and which we haven't addressed? The existing narratives that are silently holding us back and will continue to do so because we won't acknowledge them. When Hans shared this thought with me, I thought, wow, this is what we get wrong about transformation. And this is the key to unlocking our transformation. We often think our problem is not being clear on what we want, and if we could just do that better and map out the plan to get there, everything would be all right. But what if we're just flat out ignoring who we are right now and exactly how who we are right now is contributing to our status quo? Wow. It's true. You can only go as far as who you are. I mean, we talked about this in an entire episode 31, about just that, and about the 3 stories you need to know right now: your value story, your aspirational stories, and your limiting stories. And this all fits in squarely within how powerful our limiting stories can be. So how is the old you, the current you? Think about it. How is this feeding into your current status quo? I mean, do you know how this is working exactly for you? Do you know how it's working for you right now in your own life specifically? As Hans says, we are not a blank slate. We are not an empty piece of paper just waiting to be written on. The page is already filled with words and writing. And do you know what yours says? You need to, because it's everything right now. Hans was blowing my mind. I had to learn more.
So talk about the deconstruction piece.
Deconstruction it's a postmodern term that we look at the underlying assumptions of a discourse or a narrative and see that they no longer hold or no longer help us. So the old way, and I'm not saying the old way is always bad, like deconstruction doesn't mean throw it out with the trash, but the way you have always done things, the narratives you have always enacted have only gotten you to this point. But it's a mistake to think they will get you to your goal. In fact, we have to ditch them because they only got us this far, and we got to take our new narrative to our new place. But the narratives you already have only gotten you to where you're at, and they're never going to get you further than that.
So how do you know what to keep or what to leave in that particular narrative? Because I think you said in your book that, especially when you're working with others or trying to bring forth change, you have to construct the new from pieces and elements of the old.
Right.
So when you're thinking about that for yourself or for others, or in your conversation, even if you're trying to move yourself or move your movement or whoever forward together, how do you know what to keep and what to leave in that deconstruction, reconstruction process?
Now we're getting deep in the deconstruction and reconstruction. So when we're going to construct a new narrative, you're right, we're actually reconstructing a narrative out of material we already have in our cognitive frameworks or in our heads. So we don't kind of know the things we don't know. So that material is not available for our narrative. We can only construct it with the materials we already have. But when you deconstruct our old narratives, you use that material, you put it together in a new way. So you construct a new narrative out of those old materials. Now, this is not as difficult as or constraining as it sounds, because we can write 1,000 books using the same alphabet. We just have to put it together in a different way every time. But the problem is we keep putting the alphabet together in the same way, we'll write the same book again or the same narrative. So I feel like we think, oh my gosh, you're limited to those same 26 letters. But those 26 letters have written 1 billion books.
I like that. This is definitely helping me think about, because I'm in a transition point. I'm always in a transition point career-wise, and taking clients through that and taking teams through that. And because of my activist advocacy background, I've tended to be of the mind of dream up the new, reframe. Let's forge on into the future. That's my MO. Like, forget what is right now, because the status quo is a problem. We want to ditch it, and we want to imagine the new future. And then we're just, as you said, gonna miraculously get there. But this is helping me see that we already have the things and the tools and the roadmaps that we need to get to where we want to go. And sometimes it's amongst and within the things that we're trying to jettison and get rid of so hard right now.
Yeah, don't get rid of your material. So I think what you said was great, and it should also come as a relief to you. So the new way is made out of the old status quo. We just have to break that status quo apart. We have to deconstruct it to assemble the new way. But that's the same material we have. So the relief is that you already have everything you need to build your future. It just looks like something else right now.
Finally, some good news, right? I was beginning to worry that not only were we stuck with who we are, but that who we are is going to keep us stuck in our status quo forever. Wow. But nah, we've learned something different today. We've learned that even though we're working with the same 26 letters of the alphabet, we can still write a different book. We can write a different book with the same alphabet. But we can't just ditch the status quo of who we are, whether it's the status quo of who we are as individuals, who we are as organizations, or even as countries. We can't just ditch it. That's not our starting point. We have to do something else. We have to deconstruct it, but in a way that shows that we know that even as it's holding us back for now, it's also got all the treasure we need for what's next. And what comes next is reconstruction. You're probably chomping at the bit to get to that part, right? I know, I was too. And we get to all of that in episode 60. But before we get to that, I want you to chew on some things, because we covered a lot. I want you to get out a pen and a paper, and I want you to write down, either for you from your perspective or from the perspective of your team or your organization. It's up to you which perspective you're using right now. I want you to write down a list of things that you believe are your status quo. That's what I want you to put as the title for this page. My status quo, or our status quo. And just write down all the things, good or bad, that just are. They just are who you are, how you show up, your values, your assets, your flaws, your experiences. Just write as much of this down on a piece of paper. No judgment here. Just write it down and then set it aside. You'll need it for episode 60. But be sure to do this before you listen to 60. And as you're writing all of this stuff out, I want you to remember Hans' words, that you already have everything you need to build your future. You already have it. Now, get to writing. See you soon, Creating Maven. And remember, no, seriously, see you soon. Episode 60 is coming up right now. So push play and let's keep going.